request Mrs. Neela Lambah to come on stage to say a few words.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank you all for coming today. Sati was blessed to have friends and well-wishers like you. He was detected for cancer in the latter half of 2019. Despite the toll the treatment took on him physically, his spirits remained high. Towards the end of 2020, he decided to pen his thoughts. The end result was this book, which he was able to complete before he passed away in June 2022. I stand here with sadness, happiness, and a bit of trepidation. Sadness at Sati's absence. Happiness, not just because the work he completed is finally a reality, but also because so many of you he valued in his life are present here. He was meticulous. To him, relationships mattered more than anything else. He was meticulous in whatever he organized, and somewhere up there, he is perhaps fretting over some detail that I have probably overlooked today. A sense of trepidation, because I stand in unfamiliar territory, especially before a distinguished audience and an eminent panel. Each of you has more experience or insight into matters of foreign policy and the complex and intractable relationship with Pakistan. Let me start by saying that both Sati and I have roots in what is today Pakistan. Both our families were displaced by the tragic and bloody partition, which continues to be a festering wound in our subcontinent. Sati was 6 years old when the partition took place. He saw the hardships borne by his family in trying to rehabilitate themselves in a new environment. Like millions on both sides, our families also had to make a fresh start. Stark choices too had to be made: to be consumed by bitterness or to heal ourselves in pursuit of higher values and a better world. Sati chose the latter. Sati did not start his career thinking of Pakistan. He chose a destination that was at the heart of our foreign policy in the 1960s, Moscow, with Russian as his language. Over a period of time, Pakistan happened. 2 postings to Islamabad, interspersed by a stint on the Pakistan desk in the Ministry of External Affairs, and after retirement, his appointment as Prime Minister's Special Envoy. His career took him through different governments, different prime ministers, and different eras. With him, I too experienced Pakistan. The comfort of the familiar, the anxiety of the uncertain, the generosity and warmth of the people, the hostility of the state, love on the streets, tensions on the border, the joy of all that we had in common, the awkwardness of what led to our separation. Yet, in the worst of moments, there was always the human and the humane on both sides that lifted us as a people above our division. I received very moving messages from Pakistan when Sati passed away. Sati's approach to Pakistan was reflected in what he would often advise young officers. Never stop looking for possibilities, even in the most negative and challenging situations, and seek opportunities to advance our nation's interest. Sati, though by nature an optimist, was also a realist. In almost everything he did, he would set goals, negotiate hard, pursue alternatives, and draw clear lines from India's perspective with the region's interest in mind, recognizing that a neighbor cannot be wished away and that India's long-term interest lay in peaceful relations with Pakistan. This book is not about Sati. It is about the efforts various Indian prime ministers made to build normal and peaceful relations with Pakistan. He is not the main actor in this book, but a witness and a participant in a historical process of public and private engagement between the political leadership of the two countries. Sati had to be prodded into writing the book. He resisted, saying he had nothing interesting to say, as he did not want to arrogate to himself a role beyond the normal contribution as a professional diplomat. As he mentions in the book, relations with Pakistan were always political choices at the highest levels. However, because of his remarkable photographic memory and his long experience in dealing with Pakistan, many felt it was important he recorded it for readers and scholars alike, as it could be useful in the long, winding road that still lies ahead. Pakistan is a country and a relationship that will continue to occupy our attention and have an impact on us at home and abroad. A key person responsible for Sati writing this book is Mr. Natwar Singh. Sati would usually dictate to me from memory. I would write down furiously in longhand as he spoke, and then type it on the computer. The process became more labored and urgent as cancer began to finally overcome his fierce resistance. He would read and proofread and also get chapters reviewed by a few people close to him. He completed the book before he passed away. To us and some others he cared for was left the task of giving the finishing touches and the production aspects. This was our mission over the past few months. The book could not have been a reality without the consistent support and encouragement of friends and well-wishers. The book, as most of you know, has been available for over a month in the market. The purpose of today's event is to have a panel discussion with select experts on this topic, followed by questions and answers with the audience, and thereafter high tea. I take this opportunity to thank each one who played a role in the journey of this book, in the form of encouragement, editing, verifying information, providing inputs, and bringing an inspiration. In alphabetical order, I read Ambassador Javed Ashraf, UN Diplomat Ramu Damodran, Mr. James Edwin, former Member of Parliament Naresh Gujral, Mr. Sunil Khatri, Ambassador Rahul Kulshetra, Ambassador Ramesh Mule, Ambassador Ronan Sen, Mr. Ashok Srinagesh, former Foreign Minister Natwar Singh. I am grateful to former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, who graciously wrote the foreword to the book during Sati's lifetime. A special thanks to those who had taken the time, despite their busy schedules, to read the manuscript and share their thoughts, by writing the blurbs on the book. National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, former National Security Advisor Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon, former Foreign Secretary of India Ambassador Nirupma Rao, former High Commissioner to Pakistan T.C.A. Raghavan, former Director General and Chief Mentor, Confederation of Indian Industry, Mr. Tarun Das. My gratitude to the panelists who readily agreed to take part in this event. Former National Security Advisor, Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon, Ambassador G. Parthasarthi, Ambassador T.C.A. Raghavan, and Ambassador Sharad Savarwal. All have been High Commissioners in Pakistan at different times. And the moderator, Dr. C. Raja Mohan, a renowned journalist and foreign policy analyst. I would like to express my appreciation to the media in both India and Pakistan, who have written so kindly on Sati, and would also like to thank Penguin Random House for being a part of the journey and making this book a reality. I hope the book serves the purpose that Sati intended, to add to our understanding of the history of one of India's most consequential foreign policy issues, and to inspire us all to think positively and to believe in the possibility of a more peaceful future for our two countries and our two people. This is what I think motivated him to write. In pursuit of peace, India-Pakistan relations under 6 prime ministers. Thank you. I now request our distinguished panelists and moderator to come on stage.
Firstly, I want to really thank Mrs. Lambah really for making this book happen. That many of us, including many of his friends, have always requested him to put it down because he was involved in a very critical endeavor of Indian diplomacy, and that it is something that the Indian people should know. So what you've done at the end of his last few years, I mean, to really make sure and bearing all the burden of actually getting it into actual writing and then into print. So we really thank you for your special effort. Many of you here have worked with him as colleagues in the government, in the work that he has done with Pakistan, which has occupied quite a bit of our diplomatic and, mind space over the last many decades. But we have 4 panelists here, all of you are familiar with them, who've been involved with this same enterprise quite deeply. So I hope to discuss the man and his work on Pakistan and what it means for us and how we look forward in terms of our relationship with a very important neighbor. But before I get there, I mean, I just wanted to say one thing before we start, which is really in the 1971 war and the Shimla Agreement, we had broadly come to the conclusion a closure had come. But from 79, you've seen history accelerate in the subcontinent, starting with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the emergence of a whole host of new dynamics into the subcontinent. The introduction of nuclear weapons, the return of insurgency in Punjab and Kashmir, the attempt at finding new ideas, new solutions, as new problems emerged. Siachen Glacier problem did not exist before, but in the 80s it became a problem. Nuclear weapons were a reality by the end of the decade. And a world that was changing so rapidly amidst the renewed great power competition had a profound effect on India's security. And dealing with this multitude of challenges centered around Pakistan became a core preoccupation for nearly 3 to 4 decades since 1979. So in a way, Mr. Lambah was very much part of that engagement of India with this very difficult period that where India had to do its economic reform, deal with the insurgencies, the turbulence inside, and at the same time find ways to negotiate a modus vivendi with Pakistan. So it's really a work, I think, that will bears very much importance, and given his experience, I think this book is really of interest to anyone who is even remotely interested with the India-Pakistan history, because there's so much out there. So what I'm going to do is, we have 4 panelists. We're going to have we have about 45 minutes, I think, to discuss this, to discuss the man and his work. I'm going to start with Ambassador Parsati. Partha, you want to say something about the man? You were same batch, and you can tell us about his man and his work, and you used to go for morning walks, I believe, as well.
Sati, Ambassador Natwar Singh is here. He was our common boss. I was away in Karachi, and Sati was, and the ambassador.
Speak up.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm delighted to be here. Neera, thank you very much. It's a sad occasion, but it is also an occasion to rejoice his life. And I'm particularly happy Ambassador Natwar Singh is here. We were all together with you when I was in Karachi and you were in Islamabad. Vice President Hamid Ansari is here, whom has been a great friend, where we shared many a lunch when we were together in South Block. And it brings back very fond memories. But I shall be brief because it's just an introduction. I say Sati was sort of had an expertise in playing things low-key, bringing people together and arriving at a decision. And what I'd like to say here, this ability of his to persuade people is immense. And if I may say on a slightly lighter note, what I picked up from the book was that he handed over the entire discussions to the incoming government led by Prime Minister Modi. And Prime Minister Modi actually called him twice before he went on his first visit to Pakistan, where he had his own doubts about. So it is really a tribute to Sati that on such a delicate job, on such delicate negotiations, he was able to bring people who were even politically opposed together. Thank you.
Mr. Menon, I mean, you were involved mainly in the last, many times with his work. When he was negotiating this agreement, you were the Foreign Secretary, then the National Security Advisor for the UPA government. A lot of the book, the later part, of course, deals with it. But I want you to step back and think about the book as a whole, I mean, what it offers us.
Well, first, thank you for having me here. And I agree with Partha entirely, except that I think when you talk of Sati as a diplomat, you have to say Sati Nina, because Nina was as much a part of it as Sati was. But this is a book that only Sati, and you heard how Nina actually really had to work at it, how this book was written. It's a remarkable book because, Sati was the ideal diplomat. He was acute, sharp, he saw everything, understood everything, but he was still kind, civil, decent, and it comes through in the book. When you read the book, and it covers such a wide span because, as you said, it covers not just the period after 71, but actually he goes further back and he looks at how the Cold War affected the relationship. It's a mine of not just information, but of sharp analysis, and he's very careful to separate his own opinions from what he's got in the book. So for me, this is really a remarkable book. I've read it, well, twice, once in manuscript and now. And each time I find something new in it. And how many books can you say that about? Not very many ever. So really, please read the book. Please, I would really urge you, read the book, but also keep it around and keep dipping into it.
Okay. Sharath, I just wanted to come to you. Yeah. Shahid, I wanted to come to you. I mean, you served in the same position, both as a Deputy High Commissioner as well as High Commissioner in Pakistan. You wrote a book recently as well. So in terms of when you read the book, I mean, so let me start again. I mean, Sharath was also Deputy High Commissioner, later High Commissioner in Pakistan. You also recently written a book on India-Pakistan relations. So the difficulty of negotiating with Pakistan, I think one of the things that both of your books talk about. So tell us from your experience, I mean, why is it so hard to negotiate with Pakistan? I mean, unlike many other accounts, the diplomatic accounts, this is uniquely difficult. Why is it so hard?
Yeah, before I go on to that, may I say a few words about Mr. Lambah. I always found him a very kind and considerate senior who was ever sensitive to the concerns and needs of those working with him. And I did form some impressions about him while serving with him, my impressions of him as a diplomat. And I must say three things. One, he worked tirelessly right through his career for peace between India and Pakistan, but he was a realist. Two, he was a tough negotiator, hard-nosed diplomat, but not uncompromising when he saw an opportunity to promote India's national interests. So he knew the art of compromise. And third, I think he was true to his calling as a diplomat and never lost faith in dialogue and diplomacy, even under the most difficult of circumstances. He says in his book, not talking to a country which is a nuclear power and a very unstable environment is not an option. Working in Pakistan and negotiating with Pakistanis, it's the comfort of the familiar, as Mrs. Lambah said earlier, made difficult by the posture of the state. And I think the most difficult part of negotiating with the Pakistanis, working with them, is the civil-military imbalance and the dominance of the army. So you don't know, you are talking to the civilians normally. You do talk to the army from time to time, but they are not always very open. They don't open their cards all the time. You talk to the civilians, you don't know what the army is thinking. And this has happened time and again. So Pakistan is a dysfunctional state for various reasons, notably civil-military imbalance. And I think that is the biggest problem all interlocutors of Pakistan have, more so us as Indians. And that creates its own level of difficulty.
If I might come to you, TCA, I mean, the partition, the tragedy of partition, which Mr. Lambah also referred to, that hangs over the relationship in a very dark way. However much, this is not just any two states negotiating. In some senses, some people have compared it to a civil war. That is really a continuation of the problems that emerged during the division of the country in many ways. So, is that, without addressing the sources of that problem, can we merely negotiate solutions on the basis of reasonable solutions to existing problems? Because at the deep root of it is really the grievances, the accumulated grievances, both in the run-up to partition as well as after that. So.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Lambah, for imagining. My experience with Mr. Lambah was very much in the nature of his being a mentor. He became a friend, but that was later. He was really a mentor, someone on whom many of us relied for guidance, both for his enormous experience, because he dealt with Pakistan in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and then finally for about a decade as special envoy. So that was an enormous background and experience, plus of course the intuitive understanding of Pakistan because of his familial background. But Mr. Lambah was aware of the weight of history, and in fact anyone who deals with Pakistan is. But what distinguished his approach was that he was very much of an empiricist. I think he saw that the way forward was to disaggregate the larger problem. Because if you try to disentangle the issues of history, identity, memories, you will just not make any progress. And I remember once he told me that, look, the idea is not to win every argument, because you will constantly be having arguments. But the point is to see whether you can have some ground for a minimal agreement. So I think his empiricism distinguished him. And I think many in Pakistan saw that he is someone that you can do business with, that you don't have to resolve all the problems. And frankly, if you look at India and South Asia today, there is no way you can resolve all your issues with any of your neighbors. And we talk about Pakistan a great deal, but if you look at the identity issues, the territorial issues, the historical issues with Nepal or Sri Lanka or any of the others, there is no way we can expect to make progress on the grand issues while attending to the here and the now at the same time.
Coming back to you, Partha, I mean, the back channel, which is really, a lot of interest in the subject, because that was the last major thing he did with Pakistan. You wanted to say something that you were involved with the back channel as well?
No, I was, well, in the initial stages, Dr. Manmohan Singh was seeking ideas. And to me, it seemed clear that in the case of Kashmir, there is no solution other than declaring the LOC the border. That was what Indira Gandhi produced in Simla. Very realistically, Bhutto accepted. The problem was that subsequent rulers in Pakistan would not follow up on that. And strangely enough, when I went there, Sharath is here, we were together embracing each other with Mr. Vajpayee there. 6 days later, we found out the extent of infiltration into Kargil. So it's a very difficult thing to deal with. I still recall the military led by Musharraf had its own view of this whole summit because they knew what was happening up on the hills. That is really the sort of complication you face when dealing with Pakistan. But I think you should never give up. And here I may say something which Sati and I were totally in agreement on. We cannot keep people away from each other and still expect the countries to improve relations. And I think Mr. Natwar Singh would remember that, sir, you gave us an open hand to me in Karachi to issue as many visas as I wanted. And therefore, when I was in Karachi, you gave us the permission to issue as many visas as we wanted. Unless people in India and Pakistan and organizations in India and Pakistan interact with each other, this problem is never going to be solved. Its issues never. I think Sati understood that. And also he understood at that point in time, which came much later, because as I said, I left with this horrible experience of having the Prime Minister there and Kargil later. And after it will be followed up thereafter by a hijack and a coup. So it is a mercurial place to live in. But it is a neighbor you will have to live in. And the basic point I wish to make, we should not reduce ourselves to the level of Pakistan when it comes to people-to-people contacts. There is no question of getting what we give. The more the Pakistanis come here, the more they trade, the more they understand. And I think Musharraf at that point in time realized it at the end of Kargil. I was particularly impressed by the fact recently that as a follow-up to all this, thanks to Sati was twice called. And the Prime Minister took all the way for Nawaz Sharif's granddaughters were marriage to Lahore. It was another thing that they killed 60 of our CRPF personnel 3 weeks later and got Balakot in return. So you are going to have these ups and downs. Sati's crucial point, I think, which he achieved, was going back to what Dr. Manmohan Singh said. borders cannot be made changed but made irrelevant. And that, I think, still remains the only way forward, and Sati will always be remembered that he took that process forward. Thank you.
Shankar, coming to you, see from 2004, when Vajpayee came to Islamabad, you had the 3-point, not the 4-point Kashmir formula, but the understanding, we'll negotiate on Kashmir, we'll reduce terror, and we have confidence building measures. So that was the basis when, for those 3 years that followed, I mean, you had quite a bit of diplomatic activity in terms of engaging them, whether on Kashmir, on Siachen, on Sir Creek, people to people. So there was a moment, it looked like, that was really going to change the course of history, as Ambassador Lambah says. So how do you look back on that? And when did we miss the big moment? Was it possible to take it to a logical conclusion? Or?
You know, it's interesting because the paradox, as Sharad said, is that the Pakistan Army has an institutional interest in a level of hostility with India. I mean, it's good for their budgets, for their position, etc. But the fact is, and Sati says so in the book, there is no alternative to dealing with the Pakistan Army. That in fact, if you look at the best periods, the agreements that have stuck, that have worked, they were all done with the Pakistan Army. When the Pakistan Army was overtly in charge of Pakistan's fate, whether it's the Indus Waters Treaty with Ayub, whether it's, and so in some ways, for me, 2003 to roughly 2008, when things worked, when the ceasefire held on the line, when cross-border terrorism went down, there was a decline, when we did manage to get other kinds of relationships going. Something like 18,000 Pakistani school students visited India in December 2004 during their holidays. That kind of thing was possible because the Pakistan Army was in charge, because Musharraf was in charge. The problem was that the Pakistan Army can change its mind. I mean, Kayani, who was involved at every stage of that back channel. I know this because I have been in the room when Tariq Aziz rang him and said, we're going to do this, and so on. And I've seen this happen 3 or 4 times when Kayani was DGISI. When he became chief on his own and Musharraf was gone, he just denied all knowledge of it and claimed that he had nothing to do with it. This is the problem. How do you make it stick? It's not, I mean, the book makes a really strong plea for engagement. And he also says what makes for a successful back channel, how we should engage with Pakistan. And I think that's very valuable because I think Sati actually analyzed what happened throughout that period, not just the good times, but the bad times. And the conclusion he came to was you have to deal with the Pakistan Army, but you also need to temper your expectations and make sure that the incentives work on both sides. It can't be just that you get your way and you're happy with this agreement. If he has no incentive in its implementation, he's going to tear it up and walk away, which may be what happened to Simla. So and for me, I don't think anyone has thought more seriously about this or deeply about it than Sati does. And it's in the book.
Sharad, I'll come to you. This problem, so we can, Pakistan, there's a lot of problems dealing with them. But India too, I mean, since none of us are in the government here, I mean, that we too have had problems, right? I mean, even negotiated agreements, we have walked back. So there is the problem, like in all countries, any negotiation, the internal negotiation is harder than the negotiating with your adversary. So given the nature of the relationship, the pressures on our side, constantly the internal negotiation would break down and create problems, even when simple, sensible, beneficial agreements politically become unsustainable.
Well, this is a well-known fact that the relationship is impacted adversely by the baggage of history. And that's been quite clear. The circumstances of creation of Pakistan continue to weigh on the relationship till today. You have a constituency on the other side, especially the older generation. I must say the younger generation was not so attached to the two-nation theory, but the older generation, which keeps which has a strong attachment to the discredited two-nation theory. You have a section of opinion here which continues to nurse a sense of loss at the partition of India, etc., etc. And then, of course, politics of the issue. One of the points which Mr. Lambah brings out in this book, from various spots you see this, the broad consensus which prevailed for a long time on India's foreign policy in general and Pakistan policy in particular. That unfortunately has broken down. So you have Atal Bihari Vajpayee as External Affairs Minister telling the Pakistan ambassador in 1977 that there is not going to be a big change in India's Pakistan policy because the foreign policy is based more or less on consensus. He then is a leading figure in the successful effort of the Narasimha Rao government to thwart Pakistan's attempt to get a resolution passed on Kashmir at the UN Commission on Human Rights. And then consultations across the political divide continue right through 3 more prime ministers covered in this book. Their tenure, I.K. Gujral, Vajpayee himself, and his successor. So I think that consensus has now broken down. And that needs to be rebuilt because when there is a degree of politics, it's an electoral issue and so on, the space for rational choices is constricted.
Yeah. Coming to you, TCA, I mean, you wrote a book called The Curious History. It was not a curious book, but a curious history of the people next door. The kind of paradox of intense, tension between, hostility with the establishment and the popular goodwill that constantly manifests itself on the street, and I'm sure all of you have seen Indian High Commissioners mobbed in airports for visas and things like that. So when we talk about, really how do you square this? I mean, is there a room at all for us to build on that goodwill in order to change the nature of the state on the other side? Or is really these two are two different worlds that are never going to meet and both will be there forever?
Well, it's the same world, but I think we need to recognize the fundamental difference between India and Pakistan. That while the Indian High Commissioner can be mobbed in Pakistan for visas or to get films tickets for a Bollywood film or for a dance performance, you won't find similar situations in India with the same frequency. There is much greater enthusiasm and always has been for normalization at the popular level in Pakistan than there has been in India. And in India, it's much more concentrated in certain parts, especially in J&K and Punjab, than it is in the rest of the country. While in Pakistan, it's pretty broad spectrum. That whoever you meet, there's a great interest in India because that is the nature of the relationship. You are, in so many ways, the cultural hegemon. Pakistanis have grown up with your films, with your history. So much of their heritage is over there. I think part of the problem is we don't recognize this being a relationship which is always tilted in our favor, and therefore don't want to leverage it. You tend to see Pakistan as an equal adversary, when in fact you are in so many different ways the much stronger part of the equation. And I think that really adds to the complexities of day-to-day dealings with Pakistan. I think we do have to get this very clear that you're a very large country dealing with a smaller neighbor. And so it's not the same thing, but certainly some part of the kind of approach you have with your other smaller neighbors, realizing their prickliness, realizing their sensitivities, realizing all the inconsistencies in their approach, has to be part of your approach.
Partha, coming to you, we tend to internal politics. I mean, though we say non-intervention, that's nice for the birds, but with all the other neighbors, we are clearly, whatever happens in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, Nepal, you are in it, you are loom large. Why is it in the Pakistan case, our general attitude is to stay away, that the idea that we have no influence on what happens inside. Is that really true?
I don't think it's true, and I don't think any one of of my colleagues who are here will agree with that. We make and this is a successive part of Indian diplomacy, which is reach out to people. I mean, at the height of just after Kargil, we were issuing 700 visas a day. It didn't affect us. But the Pakistanis, being a smaller country, are more sensitive to anything where they end up second best. I mean, I remember, and I can quote this here, Imran Khan, I was told during the 1982 cricket tour, somebody, a Pakistani friend asked him, when I see you bowling against the Indians, you achieve so much reverse swing and you're full of josh. You're not quite bowled that way against England. His answer was, and this was told to me by a Pakistani journalist, when I play against India, I think of Kashmir and treat it as a jihad. So let us not forget there are also a reasonable spectrum who are, and every country is just, religiosity is becoming a fact of life everywhere, but in Pakistan it is very, very strong. And particularly the problem arises in Punjab. You talk to a Pashtun, you talk to the Sindhis, you have a great reach. Punjab, because it's in the heart of the military, and that causes a serious problem. And my own view is that what we have been doing is keep doing it. Don't get into arguments. Don't talk in militaristic terms. Move ahead, because right now you have reached a situation where you are the fastest growing economy in the world. Their economy has fallen apart. Serious differences are arising with the Pashtuns, who constitute a good portion of the army. So sit back, watch the situation, because they're not going to be able to come to you with anything concrete. But go back to the fundamentals. We are not fighting this war with the people of Pakistan. We are fighting, and this is Sati and I always agreed on this. Go easy with dealing with friends, making life easy for them in India. I would frankly suggest, if there's anyone from the Ministry of External Affairs, send a couple of thousand copies of that book. Because I have got letters from friends in Pakistan. I wanted to tell you, and I'll send you those letters. The praise for Sati, the respect for Sati because of that book. And it's been front-paged in the Dawn. So I think the Sati factor of standing firm, not making stupid concessions or getting into dialogue and argument, but being a confident, rising neighbor whose influence is fast spreading across the world at the rate at which we are growing, which is something, I'm sorry, with a 3% rate of savings, Pakistan is going to take for decades.
Shankar, coming to you, does a weaker Pakistan, I mean today India's economy is 10 times larger than Pakistan's. The per capita income of Bangladesh is $1,000 more than per capita income of Pakistani today, because the population growth rates, economic growth rates have dramatically altered, in hard terms, the balance of power within the subcontinent. But does a weaker neighbor is easier to negotiate, or is going to make it even harder?
Well, just to go back to your earlier question, if you look at, we are part of Pakistan's domestic politics, whether we like it or not. Musharraf does a coup. He doesn't have enough legitimacy, so he calls himself CEO. The moment he gets an invitation to Agra, he makes himself president. It's clear that, and this is not the only instance. There's a whole host of instances going backwards. So both ways, it works both ways. They're also a factor in our domestic politics, whether we like it or not. So you can't deal with this relationship the way in theory, you might in IR and so on. But to come to your question, Vajpayee wrote in the visitor's book at the Minar in Pakistan, when Partha was High Commissioner, that a strong, stable Pakistan is in India's interest. And he used to say this regularly. He said it when he came in 2004. He said it in India. And I think, frankly, if you think of the consequences of what could happen to Pakistan and the consequences for us of the worst case scenarios for Pakistan. Fortunately, I mean, you know, we've heard predictions of doom now for so many years of this so-called failed state. But it's not, none of that has happened yet. But if you think of those consequences, none of them is good for us. And what it does in terms of inviting outside powers, you've seen as Pakistan has got weaker, China's role has become much bigger. You now see great power rivalry back on our borders. In some ways, this is what happened in the 50s, what you saw, when you saw a global Cold War come and Pakistan signing defense treaties with the US. Even the other consequence, assume that the rest of the world just turns our back on this and says, not our problem. In terms of people, in terms of migration, in terms of the climate effects, none of these things can you confine to just Pakistan's borders. And you can't live in an unstable neighborhood. Sati makes a point in the book that how can you expect to prosper and live well and live a peaceful life if your neighborhood is completely unstable, insecure, and torn apart by various kinds of, and frankly, while he sees the problem in Pakistan very clearly, he also sees engagement with Pakistan as one way of actually stabilizing our own neighborhood. And for me, that is a worthwhile goal for all of us to work for.
Yeah, Sharath, coming to you, I mean, do you sense any internal debate in Pakistan? Because I see some articles, people talking about Bangladesh model of economic development. Then the sense that the relative decline vis-a-vis other South Asian neighbors is also real, especially amidst the current crisis. But you see that debate has any possibilities for influencing policy, or is it really, it's too much of chaos at this point inside Pakistan for something concrete to come out?
I think let's distinguish between the current situation, when it's a very fractious polity, they face a difficult election, the government, down the years. The elections, if they take place separately in Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and at the federal level. So this is a very peculiar situation, and let's not, confuse it with the general policy that you would adopt. Now, as far as that is concerned, we get excited. I found, every now and then, an article is reproduced in the Indian press saying it's so introspective. They are criticizing their own policies and so on. That is happening there all the time. Two changes, I think, that have taken place. We don't know them fully. One, of course, is the national discourse in Pakistan has become far more introspective than ever before. I was there in the 90s. I spent a week with Mr. Lambah, and then I was Deputy High Commissioner till 1999. And people were dependent totally on the official media. Now, with proliferation of media, social media, etc., the information flow is much freer. Therefore, the national discourse has become much more introspective. And second, what we don't realize is that in spite of all the negativity that you see from the army, the jihadis, the terrorist organizations, and so on, there is a sizable constituency in Pakistan which realizes the value of a stable relationship with India in their own interest, first and foremost in their own interest. Now, I would readily admit that, these tendencies are not strong enough so far to overcome the resistance of the old order, whatever it was, led by the army, etc. But I believe that we must take note of these constituencies, build them into our policy, adopt a more nuanced policy, because these constituencies must grow if Pakistan is ever to become a sensible state with which we can build a normal relationship.
One last question to you, TCA, before we go to the audience. In many ways, Afghanistan, say starting from 79, has really set the mood music, if you will, to India-Pakistan relations, because the 40 years of internal conflict in Afghanistan, the intervention of Soviet Union, the American occupation, provided really the background in which so much of the negative developments, because you can see there was no really jihadi violence before, say, our friends CIA came in and mobilized jihad against Soviet occupation. Since then, I mean, we had a period where the Mujahideen were fighting between themselves. The Taliban comes. In many ways, it set the tone for the rest of the region. There is a wonderful chapter, all of you, on Afghanistan and the role Ambassador Lambah played in the Bonn process. Of course, that was a period differently. But at this point, given what's happening in Afghanistan, do you see how this, you think Afghanistan is no longer a big factor, or it will continue to shape the relations between India and Pakistan?
Well, it has never shaped the relationship. It's been a factor, sometimes a major irritant from the Pakistani perspective, because from the Pakistani point of view, Afghanistan always loomed much larger, especially when they felt that the Indians had a commanding presence over there. Perhaps with the return of Taliban, it becomes less of a irritant. But in my mind, it's never been a central factor. It's been there as one of the many other issues, but the central dynamic has always been a bilateral.
No, I was talking about the forces unleashed in Afghanistan. See, for example, without Afghanistan, Pakistan would not have got the easy pass to get nuclear weapons. I mean, because of the US military economic assistance in the 1980s. So in many ways, and the kind of violence, the political violence we see in this, a lot of it was driven by the changes, that's what I was referring to, not directly, but what was happening inside Afghanistan, the rest of the world coming into Afghanistan had consequences for the region.
Yeah, perhaps, because certainly the kind of triumphalism which there was in 1989 when the Soviets decided to withdraw in Pakistan, that led to the view that if we can defeat a Soviet Union, we can replicate that same model in Jammu and Kashmir. And to some extent, you saw similar triumphalism when the Americans withdrew, but that has come down quite sharply, and they've also woken up to the real world and the realities once again of having to deal with the Afghans as a real neighbor rather than just a piece on the chessboard. But yes, I would say that the Pakistani strategic mind, especially, not so much the rest of Pakistan opinion, but the strategic mind always thinks in these securitized terms. And to that section of opinion, getting the Indians out is a great victory, no matter what the consequences are, even if it means they have created this regime next to them, which is going to have massive blowbacks in Pakistan over the coming decade.
Yeah. Thank you. I think, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open, so we'll take 3 questions at a time and come back. So why don't you go ahead? Yeah, why don't you go ahead? Yeah. So just introduce yourself. And
yeah,
the microphone.
Well, thanks a lot, ma'am. Thanks. Thank you, Vikram. Thank you, Dia. And of course, our sweetest laughter with some pain is fraught, to quote a poet. I couldn't agree more with the TCA that Ambassador Lambah truly was a great mentor. I think those of us who were privileged to work with him have been extremely fortunate. And to report to Ambassador Menon, like so many others, I have read the book, not only that, but I'll keep reading it, and I'm also going to present it to my wife as a birthday gift. Now, I think given the paucity of time, I have my own ideas, but I think I am not on the podium. So I think it will be of interest to all of us to know from this August panel that keeping in view all that this great diplomat who worked tirelessly for peace between the two countries within the overarching framework of our paramount national interest, of course, that goes without saying. What would be your 3 recommendations, even if these are talks about talks or some steps to start with, what would be your 3 or 4 recommendations as starters to the current foreign policy establishment, to the government of the day? Thank you.
Thank you. You might not be on the podium, but you can put them on the mat. So please ask a question sharply. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Yogendra Kumar from ex-retired Foreign Service. I actually served under Mr. Lambah in Islamabad. I used to be the press officer, and every day that I saw him in action was education for me as I was learning the ropes at that time. My question actually is regarding the substance. In fact, I had to read the book. You know, in terms of the nature of the states that we interact with, we talked about the fragility and so on and so forth. How realistic it is, you know, and particularly in this current situation, to think of a grand structure, grand architecture of a stable relationship. In fact, I just want to make a point because I read some press comments that even under the present government, even before Mr. Lambah actually was required to intervene, I think there were NSA level talks, and then they were resumed later on, I think again with the help of some other emissary, because of which Mr. Lambah declined to go. So my point actually is that perhaps we need to move at a much more modest, incremental level, and perhaps think about a grand design over Kashmir, which we think is the holy grail as far as stable relations with India and Pakistan are concerned. Thank you.
Anyone else in the first round? Yes, please. No, just here. Yeah. Is this introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Arvind Jolly. I was a good friend of Mr. Lambah.
Speak into the microphone.
Yes. My question is Sati's peace plan acceptable to the present government? Because I believe there's a question of redrawing the bordering along the Chenab River and free. Would that be acceptable to the present establishment? That's my question.
Okay, 3 questions. There was one on 3 concrete suggestions on how they might relate to a grand design, and a short one where the government agrees with. So let's go from that end. I mean,
Okay, so I think not 3 but 2 suggestions.
Yeah.
My mic is gone for some reason. Anyway, not 3 but 2 suggestions. These are the points which I made earlier, which are extremely important. One, build consensus. Once consensus breaks down, it becomes much more difficult to deal with a complex relationship like this. The space for constructive choices is gone. And second, and I think this is what Mr. Lambah always said, this is there in his book time and again, don't lose faith in dialogue and diplomacy. Just because they have not been able to deliver. We give a very lofty aim to our diplomacy to make Pakistan a normal state and completely normalize the relationship. That's an extremely difficult task, and when the diplomacy doesn't succeed in doing that, then we say, well, let's fall on upon other means. I think these 2 things, I would say, are extremely important.
yeah, TCA?
Well, I think we should do the simple thing. We need to reinvent the wheel, restore high commissioners, have some kind of minimal or minimally relaxed visa regime, at least talk about how trade can be resumed. I think do the simple things, the next steps will appear after that. I don't think there is a grand, there's no silver bullet that if you fire it and it registers on the target, then India and Pakistan, there'll be a new dawn, and you can't have the equivalent of a truth and reconciliation commission between countries. It doesn't work like that. It's certainly not going to work with Pakistan, and it won't work. It doesn't work anywhere in the world between neighbors. There are just too many issues. You have to continue with the hard grind of diplomacy, just like you do with all your other neighbors. There'll be ups and downs, but you deal with them. How much of this book can be is a prescriptive text for the present government? I think I'll leave that to Mr. Menon and Mr. Patsat to answer.
Now you know why he was High Commissioner to Pakistan, right? My 3 prescriptions, actually from what Yogi said, given the nature of the problem and the fragmented nature of the society and the state we're dealing with on the other side, one would be make multiple peace. You know, you make peace separately. Why are you declaring war on the Pakistani people? Let them travel. work with Pakistani business, see whether there are elements even in the establishment who you can work with. So deal with it as a disaggregated problem rather than one. Two, of course, stay engaged, keep negotiating. I mean, that Sharat said. But three, talk to the Pakistan army, because you can't get around them. Can't go over them, can't go under them. So deal with them. And today you're in a slightly different situation for when Sati and Tariq Aziz primarily managed to produce, at least bring an agreement to its final stages. Because today you're in a situation where it seems to suit the domestic political needs of both sides to have a controlled or managed level of hostility. And it seems to suit both sides, but controlled and managed. The ceasefire is holding because it's in both sides have other things to do. So this is different from what there was earlier. Sati himself was humble enough to say it's available for those who want it in the future, or maybe they can find something else because the possibilities are endless. I mean, that is real humility for me, and amazing. But I think what he showed us was how close you can get to actually dealing with particular issues. On the Kashmir thing is where he put his effort, but certainly the other issues. And because that back channel worked, various other things also worked at the same time. It created an atmosphere, at least, where you could deal with them. So that's my three things. It's my answer to all three questions.
Partha, what should the government do?
Well, I think I broadly agree with what Shankar has said. We should keep lines of communication open. And as for the question of the army, interestingly, if we had...
They speak into the microphone.
If we had Sati doing the back channel work earlier on, we still have a back channel going, and we have not reported it, but it's fairly well known, which is made up of Ajit Doval and the DGISI. I think right now, if you can ensure a degree of peace, it's going to work. The other thing, the positive signs I see is Kashmir is now, after Kargil, I think there's a recognition that they use the Baltis, to fight, and the Pakistanis lost their lives. So I think there is not much enthusiasm in POK to have enough more of their soldiers in the Northern Light Infantry fighting for Pakistan. Most important, I think, really is, let's not get excited and start saying wild things and keep, as everyone has said, let's keep our own home in order. Sort of people living in harmony with each other. That is a huge example you set. Because please believe me, one aim of the Pakistanis for a long time has been to undermine two different means. The very structural and diverse base of Indian society, and that's what the ISI has worked on. And they have failed. That speaks of the strength of our own system. And the Pakistan military is going to continue that. And also, they're going to be, at least for the next year, in deep trouble because publicly popular Imran Khan is not acceptable to most people. He's not exactly a great asset to Indo-Pakistan relations. So, I think lie low, keep a courteous dialogue, and I think the first thing we need to do is get back our high commissioners there. Raise your diplomatic relations back to the level of the high commissioner. And please don't expect reciprocity in trade or anything else. Trade will go. There are enough clever people in Pakistan and Indian businessmen who do a hell of a lot of business through the Gulf.
Dubai, yeah.
And not just Dubai. I can see Mr. Ansari smiling. It's all across the Gulf. And the fact of the matter is, I think this is something we discussed with Sati. A process of benign sort of quietness and letting them stew, because they like it or not, they're in a mess, domestic, foreign policy. It is the first time they have offended both the Americans and the Russians. They supply arms to Ukraine, and then offended the Americans by doing lots of other things which they are not particularly pleased of. So I think diplomatically, right now, given the way we are functioning, we are in a good state. Let's just cool our rhetoric, show good sense, keep our doors open. Because, I tell you what, they were not so afraid of our High Commission in Islamabad. They were afraid of guys like Madrasis like Manishankar Iyer and G. Parthasarthi in Karachi. Because you opened it out. Please believe me, the way Sindh and Balochistan changed when they were being welcomed here, which they had not happened earlier. Things change. So let's keep in touch, I think, with them. Now everybody is fighting everybody else. So, and even the Supreme Court Chief Justice is being called into question. So let them go and handle their own matters without drawing us in. Keep away from saying things which unnecessarily give an opportunity to say we are meddling around. And I'm quite certain that this will continue for quite a bit of time. I can't see the army succession itself, with Bajwa leaving, has been full of many uncertainties. So they're going to have their own equations to settle. Keep the back-channeling going on. I mean, Doval was with us, Mr. Napar Singh, when he was there, and I was in Karachi. And let this go on, and keep back on rhetoric. And please, if you meet Pakistanis at an individual level, at a personal level, don't appear, the moment you appear to have animosity, they say, we are really equal to them.
Gotcha.
But if you are growing at 6% and they are going at -3%, and you have got your trade and international relations well set up, you're okay.
I think, it's a good note, I think a positive note to end on. I mean, all four of them, are at least some suggestions of how to go forward. My sense is we're already 15 minutes, almost 20 minutes beyond the time we've had. So I would just say, in conclusion, before thanking the panelists, is one, what I've learned covering India-Pakistan, not from outside, is really when you think nothing is going on, something is going on. And when you think things are going swimmingly, someone else is out there to wreck it. So I think nobody expected the ceasefire announcement in February 2021. So I think change is inevitable. That what we see, the current standstill is related to a number of factors. But the fact is, the 3-line statement of the 2 Director Generals of Military Operations of this government, issued in 2021, 3 lines, but it does say a lot of things. That we will talk about core issues of interest to each other, and we'll maintain peace on the frontier. So peace has held. We don't know if the dialogue is going on, but I think it's important to see that, look, it's not that the entire process has been suspended. What we have is a crisis situation in Pakistan. So I think purely from a practical sense, my sense is till things settle down there, you might not see anything substantive. And the fact that Imran Khan continues to impose preconditions for a dialogue of reversing 2019 constitutional changes. So it's not entirely in our hands. You have to have them. So I think that's the first point I wanted to say. Second, I think my sense is, as we look ahead, we've achieved something in the last decade, which is really overcome the legacy of partition with Bangladesh. That after all, there was East Pakistan, West Pakistan, and we saw in the East the change in the ground level situation, the resumption of trade, the movement of people, the opening up of the waterways, the return of the connectivity, it showed us that, look, that even some of the worst historical legacies can be overcome if there is political will. And over the last decade, a strong leader in Bangladesh, with two successive governments in India, have actually moved things forward. So I think we should keep that hope alive, that even with Pakistan, that a determined pursuit of the kind that Mr. Lambah was talking about, if we keep our eyes open for opportunities, and if we know how to seize them before the fleeting moment disappears, and I think there will be many more opportunities to move forward with Pakistan, and I think we need to keep that hope alive, and I think that's one of the main messages from the book. The third message, I think, from the book and from the discussion we've had, you have to temper that hope with an empirical, clear, large dose of reality, and that it just can't be built on hope, that it must be matched by a practical, realistic appreciation of the dynamic across the border and the capacity of our system, our bureaucracy, our security bureaucracy, our entire system to take advantage of that. So I would say that. And finally, I would say, if you look at the last, in fact, the book, while the book is about Sati's work, the subtitle is about 6 prime ministers. What we've seen, I think, in the last 70 years, 75 years, is the political leaders have consistently recognized the virtue of engaging with Pakistan, irrespective of the think tankers, academics, journalists denouncing that effort. Consistently, every prime minister, including Prime Minister Mohan, that he would go on a short notice, half an hour notice into Lahore, with no security guard out there, that we've seen the efforts by every prime minister, because they recognize, I think, the political class sees it, which is having a reasonable relationship with Pakistan is in India's interest. But I think the problem is that translating that, I mean, we've faltered a number of times, sometimes an off fault, sometimes the difficulty of dealing with Pakistan. But I think that hope, that commitment from Indian political class to continue to move forward is something that will hold. And for us, those of you, certainly, those in the civil service, in the government, to seize those moments when there's political will to be able to translate. So I would say that's really the experience, the long distilled experience of Ambassador Lambah in his book. So I would say that's really something that we all need to cherish. So I would really thank all of you for coming in here this evening. And I also want to thank the panel, 4 of them. I mean, they knew the Ambassador Lambah very well, as did many of you. So please put your hands together to give an applause to our 4 panelists and to